So the first Rasta, right? The first Rasta. Who was the first Rasta? Hey, have you seen this right here? I think an old Faye woman, old Faye lady wrote this particular book. And now everybody's saying, oh yeah, Leonard Percival Howell, he's the first Rasta. But Rastafari come from Ethiopia, right? From Ethiopia, isn't that right? Okay. All right. So how could he be the first, Rasta? Rastafari. But here to this particular vlog right here, the first Rasta, right? The first Rastafari, the first Rasta. Let's put it like it. First Rasta. First Rasta came from Chicago. Mm. Mm, 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 mm. Mm, 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 mm. When I say more, fire. Say fire. More fire. Yeah, so here to this particular vlog, this particular subject matter topic here is, did you know that the first Rasta, right? The first Rasta. Many people say, oh, Rasta come from Jamaica, but really, according to the half of the story, you see the elders, right? The elders, when I say the elders, I'm talking like, there are elders today, but I'm talking about the elders when I first started trotting, you know what I'm saying? And that's going back like to the, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, this is Yadin right here. This is Ras Iodonis Tafari. L.O.J., Lion of Judah.
Lion of Judah Society.
Don't you know? They always would speak about, there's a couple of like maxims, wise sayings, like proverbs, like pick sense out of nonsense or what seems to be nonsense, and the half of the story, right? The half of the story hasn't been told. So you hear about Leonard Percival Howell, who has been kind of branded, so to speak, the first Rasta. And then people will tell you that, well, Rasta come from Jamaica. Rasta, that's a Jamaican thing, right? For real? Jake's made that? It's a Jamaican thing. For real? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure he's the first Rasta? All right. And now this book that this, I think some white or German woman, I say lady just to be, kind of polite, but, some old fake basically made this book. And it's like many of the Jakes, Jamaicans and many of the Rasta say, hey, look, Leonard Percival Howell, this is the first Rasta. He's the first Rasta. Right, but wait. Isn't the origin of Rasta, right, this kind of abbreviation? It's a abbreviation, come from Rastafari. So really, Rastafari, come from Ethiopia, right? From Ethiopia. You check what I'm saying right here? So in a sense, to say Rasta is like almost like kind of like a knockoff, like in the West over here. They says when in Rome, you do what the Romans do. So we're about like white folks. And, like they're always abbreviating things, like always kind of like making like a byproduct, So say Rasta is like a kind of a byproduct. Yes, we might say it and we might like ascribe to it in a limited sense, like Rasta, somebody we really don't know, But then we hear ones that are supposed to know. I mean, even, to Burhana Selassie, a.k.a. Robert Nesta Marley, better known as Bob Marley, credit. One thing I like about Bob Marley, right, is that when he learned certain things from, like, the elders, the Rastafari, he would change up. There's an interview where Burhana Selassie, the one they call Bob Marley, yeah, he is, like, doing an interview, and he says something about, like, yeah, go back. They're talking about going back to Africa. So he says back. And then somebody shout out forward and say, yeah, forward to Africa, right? And you hear from Bob Marley, he would say like Rastafari. You see how he began to say Rastafari, the fullness. But here, let's deal with some foolishness, right? When I say some foolishness, it's foolish because it's not true. It's not the truth. If he's saying he's the first Rasta, then what does that make, right? Rastafari, Haile Selassie. You know what I'm saying? What does that make him? Well, now this is not against, some people might say, oh, why are you going against Leonard Percival Howell? No, I love Leonard Percival Howell. Right? Also a member of the real Ethiopian World Federation. So what we're trying to show ones is that you have to have discernment. Right? And you also got to study. Now we got these like Google and stuff. You could look up stuff, right? And even AI. I'm not saying that's always correct. In fact, they have a little footnote now where they say no AI. AI can make mistakes. if you notice now, they'll point that out. Well, of course, because mistake making people, they make mistake making technology. So of course the technology is nice, it does a lot of stuff. I give thanks to what we can do in the way, the truth, and the life. But yes, it is fallible, right? But here on the First Rasta, right? Okay, yeah, this is by, what's her name? Helen or Helene. I see those accents over her name. Helene Lee, right? Helene Lee, right? And I heard somebody say, some white woman that wrote this book and everything, right? And then as I begin to examine, so here, I think it's a 2 DVD set. I mean, she got book, she got DVD. She's making money off of her version or her telling of our story, right? As Rastafari. This mainly is like for a lot of the Rastafari. So Rastas, and once it comes to Rasta or Rasta, either or, right? Share this video. I know, yeah, they're gonna bun that man out, right? Why? Because I'm not a Jake, I'm not Jamaican in that sense. Is that why you're gonna bun me out? He's not Rastafari because see, there's this lie going on. And the lie's been going on for a while. Ain't that something? I'm doing this on so-called Marcus Garvey's birthday. Isn't that interesting? Because there's a whole half of the story about Garvey that they ain't telling you. And this is not saying that he didn't do great things, but what they say, he's like John the Baptist. Well, John the Baptist lost his head. John the Baptist lost his head. Don't you know? Now, the real question is, well, why? Right? How and why did he lose his head? Right, but that's a whole other video. Here, this is speaking about Leonard Percival Howell and this particular thing. Ever since she did her books, and I think even the daughter of Leonard Percival Howell, in respect, I think we was on a platform together, right, and everything. Of course, Leonard Percival Howell wasn't the subject, and it's not against him, right, because he did his work, right. In fact, when you check out the Promise Key, you know about the Promise Key, y'all? Right, we even do a reprint where we actually have the 5 of the early Rastafari, so there's 3 of them, right, including selected some of the speeches of His Majesty all in one book. It's called the First Books, right? It's called the First Books, right? The First Books of Rastafari. I think I need to show you this here. All right, here. Yeah, you definitely have to get a copy of this right here, right? First Books, right? First Books of Rastafari, right? There we go. See at the beginning right there, at the pics for you right there. There we go, pics, right? First Books of Rastafari, right? First Books of Rastafari. There we go right there. The first books. You see what it says? First Books of Rastafari, and these are some of the earliest books that were published, especially over here in the West, that are called like Rastafari, like early documents. But remember, Rastafari don't come from Jamaica; it comes from Ethiopia. Right? Let's get it right. You know what I mean? Rastafari comes from, is a man, right? The man, Rastafari. Is Rastafari the man or the movement? People call us the movement, right? We're having the movement stagnate, or we have to return to the man. You know what I mean? Even that man-child, right? So here, the first books of Rastafari, Holy Pibby, Parchment, the Parchment Scrolls, the Black Supremacy, Parchment Scrolls, right? The Promise Key, and selected utterances of Rastafari. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right here. All right, so this right here, these particular books. So we're speaking about the Promise Key. So I mentioned 4 before. I think I mentioned 5, but actually these are the 4 foundation. When I say foundational, and I think they're important for anyone who says Rasta, right, or Rastafari, and truly is taking that seriously. Definitely to kind of study these and kind of understand the context, right? But even this here, right, we say the first books is not the first manifestation of really Rastafari. And how do we know this? Well, we know this from the one who is respectfully called the First Rasta, right? Right here, the First Rasta. So now, a lot of Rastafari, hold on for a moment, has been kind of Caribbeanized, right? And we're not saying that our, brothers and sisters, some might say Benjamites, we kind of ascribe to that. you know, because of the Negro connection, right? Right, have kind of like just focus there, right? But what about the FBA, hashtag FBA Rastafari, right? Now people say, oh, you see what you're trying to do, you're trying to, no, y'all were lied to, you was lied to, right? How do we say that, right? Well, first of all, because if we read, right, the Promise Key, right? So we show you the first books of Rastafari, but if we read the Promise Key, let's say we have the Promise Key right here. Right, let's see, we have the Promise Key right here. Promise Key. Where's the Promise Key? Right, where's the Promise Key? Right, there we go. There's the Promise Key right there. You see that? See, we're prepared. Right, you know, we're prepared right here. Promise Key. Look at that. There's the Promise Key. Right, in fact, this is like the exact same copy, like the printing of this. Right, and that's another thing about what has happened when we talk about the movement. Right, well, if it is a movement, the movement, where's it moving? Where's it going? Right, because see, you know what I'm saying, the Israelites would never had a movement out of Mitzrayim if it wasn't for Yahweh, if it wasn't for Jah, right, and if it wasn't for the man, right, that man Moshe, right, the Israelites would never had a movement from there, right, and see, some of them wanted to keep moving, right, and put the man, right, you know, that man, like Moshe, out the way, but see, Moshe was that chosen one, right, so when we read the Promise Key, right here, this book by Leonard Percival Howell, right, and here we go right here, by Leonard Percival Howell, there you see at the bottom right there, Leonard Percival Howell, also known as Gangangaru Mara, and then some will go into like a lot of like Indian and kind of Hindu relations, and because he used that particular name, yeah, but you know what, he doesn't talk about it in the Promise Key, right, he doesn't talk about that. Yes, it's another name that he used, so forth and so on, and we can get into a whole reasoning on that. But let's focus on this, right? When you look and you read, right, the Promise Key, he says Rastafari. I don't think one time, not even one time does he say Rasta.
When I say more,
You say fire.
More fire.
You know what I mean? Know what I mean? Know what I mean? Right, he doesn't say Rasta. See, this is something that came along later on, right? The abbreviation. See, these abbreviations are deviations, right? These abbreviations, because then one will say, yeah, I'm a Rasta. I've even heard one say, well, I'm a Rasta, but I'm not Rastafari. I'm like, what the hell? I mean, what the hell is this? You know what I'm saying? And then most of us, we was like, oh, you know, it's Rastafari. No, it's not Rasta for me, right? It's Rastafari, right? It's not Rasta for me, it's Rastafari. Right now, I want to show and highlight, there's a brother's work, Balanta, the Balanta Society. Hail up to the Balanta Society. Yes. Right. So right here. Okay, you see this meme right here? You see this meme right here? See, when we play that Justice loop right there, you know, the more fire. Yeah, you know? Is Leonard Howell the man who started the Rastafari movement? Now, we haven't seen the vid, right? But we picked this up because it's part of our research, right? It's a research video and share some of the results, the facts, you know, the information. You know what I mean? It's like a little mini report right here, right? So we haven't seen the video, so it's not against the video, but this is an excellent title to what we're speaking about right here, right? Is Leonard Howell the man who started the Rastafari movement? But so far, there's been nothing about Rastafari, right? Rastafari, right? Who is Rastafari? That's where Chabarim, brothers, and you know, fellow disciples, this is what we need to start. Who is Rastafari? And let's get into the basics, just the basics. Like, what does Rastafari mean? Some man was running around there saying, mean head creator, and some ones I love was saying that. I know Bob, if he had heard the reasoning and breakdown, he would have probably done a whole tune, maybe a whole album on it, right? You know, to show that Rastafari doesn't mean head creator, because Tafari, right, or Teferi means the one to be reverenced, respect. I remember we was teaching this for a while, breaking it down, seeking to make it easy for the brothers and sisters, but because for some, I wasn't Jamaican, so it was like, yo, you know, like, we can't listen to him. You know what I'm saying? And the good thing is that others, even Ethiopians in the social media sphere, you know, and others started to speak up, so much so that if you go to the Wikipedia page, I think the Wikipedia page has referenced and sourced it, right? So we now hear one's coming to me saying that, yo, Rastafari don't mean head creator. I never said it did. You know what I'm saying? But I'm like thinking, I'm kind of smiling to myself like, wow. You know what I mean? The pot calling the kettle, right? So we have to get to the man, right? But is he the man, right? Let's just go with this right here. Is he the man, right, who started the Rastafari movement? All right. So is it the Rastafari movement or is it Rasta? You see where the confusion comes in? See, because when we say Rastafari, right, as we the people, right, called, chosen, and faithful. You see, that's the qualifier. All right. All right. Not Rastafari. You see, that Rastafari thing, right, that comes from the patois, Jamaican, the patois there, because I, when we say Haile Selassie, I, right? But as we, study, as his man says, education is the key, right? Haile Selassie, the Rastafari of all Rastafari, says education is the key, right? So we thought we was doing the right thing, get into the education, but, what it says, if you reprove like a fool, right, a fool is going to hate you. But if you rebuke or reprove a wise man will love you. So I guess I learned something about ones and ones I was calling brethren, or brethren. You know what I'm saying? But the man who started the Rastafari movement. So Ras, right? First, okay, let's go to the beginning, right? 1892, the man-child born. Psalm 87, verse 4. With Ethiopia, this man was born there. With this was born there, right? Aim Kush Zeyulad Sham, right? That's Psalm 87, verse 4. So we get the man-child. 1892, right? And what is his name? What's his name? Teferi, or anglicized as Tafari, right? They say Tafari, because it's English and everything, right? The way people speak, right? But actually it's Teferi, right? Teferi sound more like we, right? We, Rastafari, right? So it's not Rasta for I or Rasta for me. You know what I'm saying? That's the problem. That's where the problem has come in. Since the elders or since those before, since more of, by comparison, what seems like the golden age, you know what I mean? With, the ones of the like of BMW, Black Man's Wagon, or Bob Marley and the Wailers, the Peter Toshes and the others, the Jacob Killer Millers. Of course, I'm speaking about some of those who basically were proclaiming that word, that reach. Most of us didn't reach the elders in Jamaica, but even the elders from Jamaica, the Nyabingi elders, they reached up here, and that was a good meeting with them as well. I learned and confirmed a lot, and I hope that they picked up some things as well. I definitely think they did, right? But now those elders are gone. Right, so it's like we, in a sense, we come into the room of the elders. Not saying that we all are, right? Truly, elder doesn't mean you're just older, right? But it means you have some wisdom. You have something that's of benefit, right? Something that is good, right? Like the truth, right? And therefore, we need to have the truth, right? Because the truth is what will set us free. So Rastafari, when we put it together, one word, Rastafari, 9 letters. Check that out, 9 letters right there, all right? 9 letters, right? And we even had published something back in the late 80s, early 90s of the number 9, the number of Rastafari revelation. Yes, I see some ones that picked up on the whole 9 reasoning and have even taken it further. Give thanks for your labor, your service as well, because here's to give credit, where credit is due, tribute to who tribute is due. Enough tribute is due, right, to Leonard Howell, right? But the way that the truth is being like twisted and kind of turned and everything like that, it's almost like what his Majesty says, most effectively organized program of deceptive, right, propaganda, because we're not getting the truth of the matter. Right? So Rastafari, that's the man, right? That's that man-child that was born there, right? Ijasa Gora, Ethiopia, Harar, right? That was born there. Psalm 87, verse 4. Now, this is, of course, from a Rastafari perspective. I know people have other perspective. We can address you and, deal with your, problem, or your questions elsewhere, right? But the first things first, right? So why do we call this one right here? That Rasta, the first Rasta, right, came from Chicago. Here we have to give credit where credit is due to Balanta. To the Balanta Society, right? And we want to share this right here. Let's see if we have this right here. Let's actually go to, right? I usually don't go here, right, to my WhatsApp. Okay, everything is, I don't want to, one's numbers might show up, and just want to, don't want any goofies, to like trouble, any of our people. So here you see on the side, we're going to zoom in more on that. It's orientated on the side. So here, this is something that was circulating. I give thanks. I think the brothers out there, but we haven't linked up just yet, right? Leonard Percival Howell, he learns about Rastafarites. Wait, hold on for a moment. I thought he's the first Rastafari, or the first man who started the Rastafari movement. I thought he's the first Rasta, right? See, people are going to bank, and not just that they're making money off of their books, like the book we just showed you, right? But there's inaccuracies, right? There's disinformation. There's not accurate information. What about the half of the story, right, that has not been told, right? The half of the story, right? What's the half of the story? So he learns about Rastafarites from the original, right, U.S. Black American Rastafari. The original, hashtag FBA? Hashtag, yeah, right? So even that, wow. See, there was songs like hip-hop, hip-hop, it was Jamaicans that, that started hip-hop, and like, what the, what I mean? It's like we saying that we started, ska and rock steady and reggae, like we didn't start that. We definitely inspired it, but we didn't start that. But this is different. This is not that, right? So then he took the Rastafari idea to Jamaica. Right? He took the Rastafari idea to Jamaica, but he took it from where? He took it from America, right? And the black Americans. Rastafarites. So what happened to the Rastafarites? Right? We don't hear one saying that, right? We don't hear one saying that. Yeah, I know, we Rastafarites. You know what I mean? Check. And the first church of Rastafari as well, in New Orleans, right? Know what I mean? Right? I heard about decades ago, right? So I was sharing this with a brother man, right? Sharing the information that was shared to me. So how different, I asked the question to the brother. I said, well, how different, right, things would be, right? Just a question. How different would things be right now, right? Because there's a lot of confusion, right? And Babylon, the meaning of Babylon is confusion. Right, so we have this right here, right, this right here. I don't know if you've seen this before. It's circulating around there. If you take down the name and you put in the search and look at pictures, you'll probably find it. The Rastafarites retreat to mountain fastness of St. Catherine. Now you notice what it says here? Rastafarites. How come that wasn't continued? How come it's got abbreviated, it got chopped down, right? You see, to say Ras is to say head, literally, in the Amharic language, right? In the King of Kings language, right? In that Afro-Semitic, African-Semitic, Shemitic language, right? The Afro-Asiatic, some might say, the scholars, that's how they talk, right? But to say Ras is say head, but contextually it can be used to a prince. So a prince, like on a level of roughly what a duke would be, similar, right? In the other people, in the Anglo, in the Anglo system, they call it white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but actually, did you know they were black Anglo-Saxons? But that's another vid as well there too. But the Rastafarites, they retreat to mountain fastness of St. Catherine. So hail up to St. Catherine, hail up to the original Rastafari. You notice, right? You notice that many of the early Rastafari, so we're showing you the Rastafari before there was the dreadlocks, man, and before there was the beards, man. Now we're not saying that the Nazarite, right, and the Nazarene, should we say, vow is not important. And we're not saying that the beard as a precept scripturally is not important, but it is, right? However, we're just saying that who were the ones that started this out, right? Ones like Leonard Percival Howell. Enough honors, and respect. Now, over here in this particular article, if we scroll down here, right? You see what it says, Rastafarites burning coal? You see that right there? Rastafarites burning coal. I don't know how well you can see this for yourself, right? With the part that's highlighted. It says, after his travels, right? After his travels and subsequent return, right, to the quote states, Howell, right, was attracted to the Rastafarites, right, and afterward returned to this island to preach the tenets, right. Result of his efforts is that these people formed a society, right? So we call it LOJ, Lion of Judah Society. You know what I mean?
Lion of Judah Society.
Somebody say, oh, when I deal with society, because society, such and such and such. Well, that's one way of looking at it, but, you know, we have to look at things objectively, right? But not only subjectively, right? So he formed a society that was known as the Ethiopian Salvation Society. You see it right there? Now, that might not be too clear, but we give thanks to Belanta for bringing out, this is crucial information. Because we were still on the New Orleans, First Church of Rastafari, New Orleans, right? Still on the fact of Reverend James Morris Webb, you know? Reverend James Morris Webb, right? He was the first proclaimer that said, look to Africa where a black man will be crowned king. He was a Chicago, you know, resident of Chicago, right? Known as like a Chicago preacher, right? He was a preacher, like a Christian preacher that saw the light, right? And could connect the dots, right? And had the vision, right? And he said, look to Africa where a black man will be crowned king. In him you will find the Redeemer. But who gets the credit? All the credit for that? It's Marcus, right, Garvey, that they call Marcus Messiah Garvey. That the elders taught us was, he's like the John the Baptist, right? But explain, if he's the John the Baptist, the part about losing your head. See, this goes to the half of the story, right? The half of the story. So we're not being told the whole story of Rastafari, right? We're not being told the whole story, right? And why is that important, right? Well, why is that important? Let's come out of this right here, right? Let's come out of this right here. Let's scroll down here. Now, this is what the brother said, right? Here is no mystery about the origins of the Rastafari movement. Here is no mystery about the origin of the Rastafari movement, and I have documented it. In other words, this is Belanta. We're going to go to his site just now. I've documented it and taught the true history for 2 decades now. Well, I give thanks to the brother for his labor. You know, definitely give thanks to the brother for his labor here. Yes, I. Definitely, you know. So a fellow, as we say, Black American or Afro-American, right, as they said back in them days, you know, is teaching this truth here, right, and documenting it, right? The movement started in Chicago. Where? In Chicago, right? So think how much different things would be even with Chirac. My goodness. Chan. You see how important truth is, right? And how bad a lie is? You see what I'm saying? The movement started in Chicago in 1990, then spread to Harlem. In fact, a lot of things did move that way. Like, you know, a lot of times we talk about Harlem, you know, they say Black Mecca. We say it's that Black Mecca stuff. Yeah. More like a Black Jerusalem, right? More like a Black Jerusalem. They just put their Dome of the Rock on top of what they call, you know, the temple, right? Be that as it may, Howell himself told the Jamaican Daily Gleaner. So this is facts, this is evidence. Why don't you dox this? You know, put out the document on this, right? Share this in. And here's the bad thing. There's many ones and ones, right? Even ones who are like in the eldership even today who are suppressing this truth, right? And are going to have, no doubt, like angry reactions to this truth, right? You see, the truth is an offense, but it's not a sin. It's not uckery, or as some would say, fuckery, right? The fuckery is the lie, right? So we see that the Rastafari movement, as it says right here, started where? Right? Started in the USA with so-called Black Americans, or some say today, foundational Black Americans. Who knew? Right? Who knew? Right? Well, Jamaican Daily Gleaner, they knew, right? November 23rd, 1940. What year is it? 2025? 2025? 2025. That was 85 years ago. So this truth from 85 years now. 85 years. Right? 85 years. Chan. Right? So what did Howell, Leonard Percival Howell, who is called, right, the first Rasta, right, by Helen Lee, right, and others that have been just pushing that, right? Yo, the first Rasta. Oh, Leonard Percival Howell, the first Rasta, right? But is that the truth? They could have said the first Rasta in Jamaica, right? You know what I'm saying? That would be more true, right? There we go. There we go. Right? He was the first Rasta in Jamaica. Right? Well, I don't even put the Rasta thing on him, although we have that on the book, right? In case you just coming in, right, and you hadn't seen this over here. Where's that book cover? Where's that book cover? So you can see we have some of the same things up here, you know, because we want it to be well documented, right? Have the facts. So the Rastas, the maroon, right? So they're not talking about the Geechee. You're not talking about the Gullah, right? We're talking about the Rasta and maroon, the rebels of the Caribbean, right? It sounds almost like a kind of like a homage, right? A kind of a homage to pirates of the Caribbean, right? Was this pirated? Was it hijacked, right? And has it been done in such a subtle way that the evidence is right in front of us? You know, we hear a lot of ones talking about Rasta this, Rasta that, going back to Jamaica Gleaner, you know, talking about what happened with the Coral Gardens, you know what I mean, those tragedies there, you know, that we as fellow Rastafari, you know, we denounce, we repudiate. You know what I mean? I mean, there's still judgments that need to be because of that. But here, let's talk about the first Rasta, right? The first Rasta. Now, this is a very strange book. You see at the bottom down here? I want to show you at the bottom. They add ones like Gandhi. They add ones like, who's that? Is that Lenin? Right? Lenin? Right? Is that Lenin? Right? I think on one cover they even add Marx, Engels, and Lenin. So it's communism. Right, you know, that certain atheistic, some say Yehudi or whatnot, Ihud, you know, made. Then it has Marcus Garvey. Look, they don't have a full face of Marcus Garvey there, right? You got the hands up with the cuffs, right? And then you see over there, right? You see over there, the pinnacle way, okay? You see over there, His Majesty's over in the corner. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I mean, think about that right here. This is saying the first Rasta, right? And this is by Helen Lee. Right, Helen Lee. She needs to do a retraction. She needs to put in that information. Right, you know. Now maybe the information's there. Right, we haven't checked out the book because we was offended. Right, the truth. No, this is not true. This is a lie. Right, lies can be offensive too. You know what I'm saying? And because it's offensive, we have to go on the offensive about it. And let's get to our brother's work right here, so we can just show you the epicenter of this. Right. So in the Jamaican Gleaner. Right, Jamaican Daily Gleaner, right, Jamaican Daily Gleaner from November 23rd, 1940. What did, right, the one who is called the first Rasta, this was the first Rasta came from Chicago, right, that's what we're going with. The first Rasta came from Chicago, right, because Leonard Percival Howell, right, here's the part that we showed you when we zoomed in, that was circled by the red, right, circle, quote, after my travels and subsequent return to the United States. Return where? Where did he return? To the United States. It's like Garvey. He only got big because only here was ready and willing hearts and minds to really receive, you know, what them men were about. Right? But also to teach and impart. Right? You know, we talk about give and take, but here we only learned that, well, you know, certain ones came from Jamaica and taught us culture. I mean, how insulting can you be? You know what I mean? This is where repentance is so necessary, right? But notice what Leonard Percival Howell said. After my travels and subsequent return to the United States, I became attracted. He became attracted, right, to the Rastafarites. Right? To who? Did he say to the Rastas? He doesn't say Rastas. Right? More. He said to the Rastafarites. You see, once you abbreviate it, then you allow all the sort of things to come in, and that's what's happened, right? And that's what we're faced with today, right? And afterwards, like what it says, and afterwards, right? After he returned to the United States, and afterwards, so he traveled, subsequent return to the USA, right, to United States of America, and especially to the Black American community, right? And they says after he became attracted to the Rastafarites, right, afterward returned home, right, to Jamaica, right? Let me tell you about Jamaica. Let me tell you about Leonard Percival Howell, right, of Jamaica, right? Let me tell you about the First Rasta, right? Let me tell you about how Rastafari came to Jamaica, right? To preach its tenets, right? It says it's tenants, but actually the tenets, right? It says tenants, right? Right? So read, here you go, right here. Read the true story, right, of the origins of the Rastafarites here. So when this was shared with me, man, I was enough glad, because I said this is additional evidence. You know what I mean? And in spite of some of these things being, like even this video, we're putting it out. Are they going to like and share it? You know what I mean? Share it with others. You know what I mean? It's not for views. This is for truth. This is for the right point of view, right? So yeah, I guess so, views. You know what I'm saying? But it's not, it's not like you be thinking, because you're not thinking truly about this way, the Rastafari way. So here's balanta.org, and the article, the fuller name of the article is called History. Right, under history, filed under history, May 5th, the most important day in the 20th century, and evidence that the ancestors of African people communicate to their descendants on earth and shape world events. So we can't shape nothing if we're dealing with a lie. You know what I mean? But we're being shaped, out of shape, bent out of shape with a lie. Right, but here, let's go here. So let's go over here. Let's bring that up right here. Let's go to the page. So here's the page right here. You can see it at the top right there in the search. Right? You see it there? Okay. May 5th. This is written May 5th, 2021. Right? This should be a hot article. Right? There should be Rastafari one-to-ones doing, podcasts and talking about this. Yeah, this is an important truth that we have here, so we can see the fuller picture. All that. Right? But what's up? Right? What's up? What it do? Right? Right? What's up though? Right? May 5th, the most important day in the 20th century, and evidence that the ancestors of African people communicate to their descendants on earth and shape world events. Now, love to go through this full article, bro. You did a good work here, for real. And also other work you got on your site. Just want you to know this is Yadin. This is Ras Ayadonis Tafari. Yeah, hashtag FBA. Rastafari. Yeah, Black American, said way. You know what I'm saying? Because many ones say, oh, you Rasta, that's a Jamaican thing. And even back in the days, and we're like, the first church of Rastafari was back in the early 1900s and everything else. And Marcus Garvey came here, and the Reverend James Morris Webb, he's the first one to proclaim, and it took a while. You are saying that ones and ones, just ignore it, which makes me question their Rasta card. Right? Where you get that Rasta card from? The name is Rastafari. Right? Rastafari. Right? Let's do this right here so we can get right to it. I want to show you this in the article so you can see this for yourself right here. Let's scroll down here, and we're going to find on page. There we go. We're remembered here. Right? Let's go here. Right? Let's scroll down here. There's 4 entries. There's 4 entries right here. Right? Let's scroll to this right here. Now, there's so much information here, right? Once again, thank you, bro, right, for it, right? And here's some of the early books, right, of the Rastafari. Definitely the ones I would highly recommend is Reverend Webb's book, A Black Man Will Be the Coming Universal King, right? That's where he said, like, look to Africa, right, where a black man will be crowned king in him. And he even said it different than Garvey said it. We got to examine that right there. He said, in him you will find the Redeemer. What does that mean? Is this biblical? The kinsman redeemer? proven by biblical history. This is 1919. Check that out, right? Now, the philosophy and opinions, I don't rate that like others rate it. I rate selected speeches of our namesake, the Rastafari, our Godfather and King of Kings, right? The elect of God, conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, Haile Selassie I. I rate that even more so, right? I mean, it's a good read, right? And he says some important things, but give us a teaching, of His Majesty. Just keep it a buck. You know what I'm saying? Rogers, there's also Athlete Rogers, the Holy Pivy. That's one of the books within the first books of Rastafari. Get a copy, right? Support the work. Carry your share, of the labor, of love, of Jah's love. Reverend Ballantyne's Royal Parchment Scroll of Black Supremacy, that's the Royal Parchment Scroll right there, from 1924 to 1927, right? And the amazing thing is the Black American connection, right? And the hashtag FBA, right? Rastafari connection, yeah? Leonard Howell is usually credited with being the first Rasta. Leonard Howell left Jamaica and arrived in the United States in October 1918, right? Where after it is said that Howell worked on 5 U.S. Army vessels until his discharge in 1923. It is likely that Howell read such newspaper headlines such as, "The Moses of the Negro race has come to New York and heads a universal organization already numbering 2 million that is about to elect a high potentate and dreams of reviving the glories of ancient Ethiopia." In the old dictionaries, when black people, like our ancestors, hashtag FBA ancestors, when they were doing their research and everything, right, to get out of that Negro, that byword and everything, you looked in the dictionaries, and under Ethiopian, it said Negro, and next to Negro, it linked Ethiopian. That's an amazing thing because today we have, right, another kind of counterinsurgency, so to speak, right, among some of the Hebrew Israelites that go after this Zondervan dictionary, right, that gives a diverse doctrine, right? But be that as it may, that appeared, the article here, in the New York World special feature by Michael Gold for the Sunday supplement on August 22nd, 1920. So our brother here, Balanta, did his research, Balanta Society. Check out the Balanta Society, y'all. Right? Check out the articles, support the work, right? Brother, if I know we go through ebbs and flows, but this is a good work. Hopefully, I know we have common, like on Facebook where they say, like we'll want to have like common friends, like some people that we might know. They say the 6 degrees of so-called separation, but definitely like to link up with you as well, to even do more of an interview about these things here on our platform. But nevertheless, the RTI, Rastafari Israelites on the Live, do a podcast on this, you know what I mean? But nevertheless, in 1924, Howell took a room on Horatio Street in the Lower East Side. East Side? The Lower East Side, New York, right? Where he stayed until he returned to Jamaica in November 1932, right? In May 1924, Leonard Howell applied for U.S. citizenship. Check that out, right? Ain't nothing new under the sun, right? And later opened a shop. He opened a shop at 113 West 136th Street in Harlem, right? The Black Jerusalem, right, of the West, right? According to Archibald Dunkley in Robert A. Hill in Dread History, quote, the UNIA, stands for UNIA, we call it UNIA or United Negro Improvement Association, declared against Howell, right? Declared against Howell in New York, right? What did he declare against Howell in New York? Howell himself told the Jamaican Daily Gleaner, November 23rd, 1940, that, what did he tell the Jamaican Daily Gleaner? After my travels and subsequent return to the United States, I became attracted to the Rastafarites. There we go. All right. And afterward returned home to Jamaica to preach his tenets. Well, they have tenets there. Tenets, right? And here's the article down here that we showed before, right? Let's see if we can make it. I know this one's a little blur right here, but let's see. It's tenets. Actually, that's a typo. Tenets, Tenets, right? The tenets, right? That's in the section of the article, Rastafarites burning coal, right? Right there, right? That community, that was one of the most successful communities. That was almost like those Rastafarites in Jamaica, St. Catherine. That was like comparable to what the NOI, right, was doing up here with community building, right? These are real works that we so desperately even need, in today's time, right? Just one more, please, all right? And these are points, right, on these main points, right? So right here, let's go through this article right here, just down here, right? Because there's 4 mentions of the Rastafarites. Just want to cover that, right, in this video, right? Because the first Rasta, right, Rasta, they say, right, came from Chicago, right? Came from Chicago, USA, right? USA, the Black American, right, origins, right, of the Rastafari movement in the West, right? Because we can't forget that lightning shine from east to west, right? Check, right? Where did Howell learn the tenets? They have tenets there, but as we can see from zooming in, right? Not tenants like you have tenants, but tenets, right? Tenets, right? Of Rastafarites. So where did Howell learn the tenets of Rastafari, or the tenets, right? The tenets, right, of Rastafari? In the United States, in the USA, from Reading, right? From Reading, from Webb, right? From Ford, from Rogers, from Ballantine, and lastly but not leastly, from Garvey. Well, some things from Garvey, right? We have to get into that. That's a whole, video and study, right? Maybe even a series, because we have to break it down and build. I mean, for those who care to know the truth, right? Because some say that Garvey was like a grifter, like it's not a surprise that we see with Umar Johnson today, when people think about the ship line, right? But then again, we hope for better, but we just have to put that on the record right there. Some are going to be upset because they say, hey, how could you do this on Marcus Garvey's birthday? Well, how could Garvey say, right, the slander that he said against the Rastafari Haile Selassie first? How could he do that, right? How could he? All right? You know what I mean? You see what I'm saying? We don't call ourselves Garveyites. There are others who are Garveyites. I know there's some Rastas that say they're a Garveyite and a Rastafari. Well, you couldn't be a follower of John the Baptist and of Jesus Christ, right? Of Yeshua HaMashiach, or Jesus Christus. Nah, right? No, you either come from low degree to high degree, or you kind of like Moni in the middle. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Know what I mean? Right? Where were the first tenants? Now here he gets it right here, right? The first tenants. Where were the first tenants of the Rastafarites? See, this is how it is with truth. It's like what they call it, the 5. I mean, some have more than 5, but I remember originally it was 5. There's what they call it, the 5 degrees or something like that of what was that thing called? Of depression or something like that. I'm forgetting it, right? Some of you probably know what I'm talking about right there. But one of them is like when you bring out the truth, people fight against it, they hate on it, and then they go through these different stages. The stages, of depression, and like they go through these stages and everything, because it's going to depress some people. Because when you recognize how closely connected these facts are with the few facts you may have gotten, and how this is the significant half of the story that's not being told, and how people have doubled down on the lie, I really hope and pray, for one's ability, to forgive yourself, right? And to make that change and start talking the truth. Let's speak the truth. Let's bring this together as it was together then. See, then he didn't deny, Leonard Percival Howell, he didn't deny where that origination. So that means that there was already Rastafarites in the USA. going back to all in the 1900s. They say like 1919, if not before, because when His Majesty, when Tafari first became Ras, that was what, 1913, around 1913, 1914, roughly around that time right there. So just to understand, right, in that early time, one's in this North country called United States of America, they knew these truths, right? But the half of the story has been, right, suppressed, right? Because I know for sure there's some ones who know this already, who the same information was delivered to them, right? And you'll see that they have said nothing. They talked a lot of Rasta talk, but they haven't talked nothing about this. What do we call that, right? What's Majesty said, the voice of truth that matters most, right? Right? Acceptance of Ethiopian identity. We get this in Rogers, right? The brother did a good work here. Balanta Society, right? Rogers, 1917. Reading, 1919, right? These are key names and their documents, the books that they wrote. Look these things up. The acceptance of Ethiopian identity. Are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel? Amos 9 and 7. That's why a lot of our Black American, right, Afro-American, Black American ancestors, they made that link. They made that link from such a time. There's already that link that was made, right, back in the days, right? Even going back to even before the 20th century or the 1900s, right? And we can document that, right? So the tenets, the first tenets, acceptance, right, that the Negro, right, and the Ethiopian connection, but also what's missing from this is the true Israelite connection, the true Israelite connection, the true Israelite connection. Yes? Rejection of white supremacy. So people talk about, oh, this white supremacy like it's a new thing. You see what I'm saying? The problem is that a lot of people talking about white supremacy haven't really read or studied or learned from the elders. So what they're doing is kind of like doing a remix. Like we're saying the same thing happened with this whole Rasta thing. You know what I'm saying? Rejection of white supremacy. Holmes, 1917. Rogers, 1917. Right? Reading, 1919. So we have the first tenets of the Rastafarites. That the first Rasta, as many of you say, right, learned and from his attraction, magnetism, attraction. Right? Yes. The use of biblical prophecy, right? So you hear some fools want to bun the Bible. You just dumb, or you think you know something, but you really know nothing. Fire. Know what I mean? Chabarim. Know what I mean? Chabarim. Right? The use of biblical prophecy. Where we know this? From Reading, Rogers, but notice where Webb comes in. Notice what Webb, the Chicago mystic that first said, look to Africa, right? Where a black man will be crowned king. In him you'll find a redeemer. Compare that with what Garvey said. So Garvey picked this up from Reverend James Morris Webb. Here's what's so interesting, that the bishop of the first church, right, of the Judahites, right, the Jews, but more correctly, the Judahites, the Judeans in the New Testament gospel, right, the first bishop, the pastor of that congregation that followed Moshiach was James. Remember James? James in the Bible, right, which is basically Jacob, right? So notice where Webb comes in, the use of biblical prophecy. Because remember, he prophesied something, right? Said, look to Africa, look to the east, look to Africa, right? The lightning shine from the east to the west, where a black man will be crowned king. In him you find a redeemer. And boom, look what happened. It was said, and so it was done, right? Recognition of messianic. So the whole Messiah connection. So we talk about Christ, and Christ is the Greek translation, Christos, of Moshiach from the Hebrew. So you know, Christ and his kingly character, some fools, some ignoramuses, some stupid people. We're stupid, we're not being insulting. I know we might take it like that, but it's like this ignorant. You just don't know, and you don't know so much that you don't know, right? You know, that you need to get to know what you don't know, right? Recognition of messianic universal black king. This is Webb too, 1919. We pointed to the books above, right? And these books are still in circulation. You can get a PDF of it. Sit down and read through it, study. Pledge of allegiance to the government of Rastafari. to that man child that was born there, right? So even here we're pointing to some key significant areas of scripture, right? And someone maybe want to wrestle on, or it says, "Are you not as the children of Ethiopians?" Well, who does he compare? Who does Yahweh, right, in his word compare? Right? Israel is unique, is this thing, but what about the Israelites of Ethiopia? See what I'm saying? You know what I mean? So this is Reading, 1919, Reading, right? Let's see if we can get this here. We'll make sure we bring this full screen, right? So the Pledge of Allegiance to the government of Rastafari. See, a lot of this is what led to the true Ethiopian World Federation, right? If you want to join First Unit, you know, I maybe need to put a link, you know, so ones want to join First Unit, you know what I'm saying? It's all about First Unit, you know, in the Federation today. That's a whole other matter right there. You know, Section 11 prevents me from going to some business, you know what I'm saying, only with active members, but definitely there's some things that are for the public to know. But the connection from before the coronation. So this is before Rastafari was anointed, right? Was anointed and crowned, right, with the throne name of Kadamawi Haile Selassie, or Haile Selassie first, right? So there's already a Pledge of Allegiance. Use of picture of Rastafari. We see this in a Marcus Garvey. And there's a very interesting picture that I don't have this on hand, brothers and sisters. Montaletto, Brother Montaletto, I think that I had put it on your Facebook as well. I caught a pic of that. And there's this march, Marcus Garvey Unia March, UNIA March, and you see the march. I think we see either Reverend, is that not Reverend, it's from the Black Jews of Harlem, right? You see, the picture is not super clear, but I would say that it may be Arnold, Reverend, Rabbi, I keep saying Reverend, but Revi, right? Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford, right? But there's the one before him from the Moorish Jews, right? You know, the Moorish Jews temple, right? You know, there's Mordecai, Rabbi Mordecai Herman, right? But you see them marching at the head of the march. They're carrying two pictures, right? They're carrying a picture of Rastafari. This is pre-coronation, and they're carrying a picture of Marcus Messiah Garvey. Now remember the whole biblical prophecy connection, right? Before there's the voice. We still have Garvey's voice. I mean, just listen to the voice and you'll see that the Rastafari elders were correct that he was a John the Baptist, but he didn't follow through, right? You got to read Matthew chapter 11 if you want to get the full view, right? So use of the picture of Rastafari from Reading 1919 and Ford, right? And Ford, right, in 1930, right? And Ford, Arnold Josiah Ford, right? Wentworth Arthur Matthew, right? These ones. So we see a link between the early Rastafari community, right, and the Black Jews, we the Black Jews, and then the link with the line of the tribe of Judah, right? You gotta put all that together. This is why we say we the Black Jews of the line of the tribe of Judah. We didn't say tribe of Judaism, but the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah, right? The physical return to Ethiopia for the purpose of building, right, the Ethiopian Empire. Now, we're talking the Ethiopian Empire, especially at that time in that Iowa, right? Just have to bring it out so I hope you can see everything right there. That was Delaney. Delaney in 1836. Delaney, 1836. Alexander in 1908. Reading in 1919. The Balanta Society has done an excellent research here. You got to get this page, you know what I mean? This information is vital. You know what I mean? The use, right, of Ethiopian flag and parade. We had this from Reading in 1919 and Rogers, right, in 1919, right? Martyrdom, right, in defense of Ethiopian freedom. Because remember, for the elders and the scholars and the academics, those who studied and did their research, right, that was real black consciousness back in them days, right? They already made the Negro and the Ethiopian and the Israelite connection was all made in one fell swoop. Yes. So martyrdom, right, Kiddush Hashem, right? That's a Hebraic principle, Kedush Hashem. So like if we give our life for the cause of Yahweh, the cause of Jah, for the cause of Yah, in Yahweh, in Yah's way, truth, and life, right? This is a way of like sanctifying, right, the name. Even in Yeshua HaMashiach, we see that principle, right? In our Black Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Check. So right here, organization for repatriation, right? Repatriation to Ethiopia, right? To making that aliyah, right? Delaney, 1836, Reading, 1919. So when people say, why did Benito Mussolini and the fascists invade Ethiopia? Why did the Pope and the rest of them, bless the bombs against innocent women and children and civilians, the poison gas, the WMDs? Those were WMDs back in them days. You see what I'm saying? Why did they do that against them, right? You see how when we get the background, it becomes obvious? It wasn't lost on the people then, but it's lost on people now, right? Because as the King, right, of Kings teaches us, right, education is the key. So on September 2nd, 1924, Garvey and the UNIA, it forwarded a petition of 4 million Negroes of the United States of America to His Excellency, the President of the United States, praying for a friendly and sympathetic consideration of the plan of founding a nation in Africa for the Negro people, and to encourage them in assisting to develop already independent Negro nations as a means of helping to solve the conflicting problems of race. Now, that's getting into some of those things right there. The same year, I got to give you this history so you can see the half of the story that they haven't told, they haven't sung about it. Nobody remembers Dr. Malaku. Nobody remembers Dr. Malaku Emmanuel Bayan. Who remembers him? Right? Who remembers him? Right? Been wanting our brother Burning Spear, do a tune. Somebody do a tune. Nobody remembers Dr. Malaku. It'll be a hit. And make sure you tell him Yadin, right? Told you so. Ras Ayadonis Safari told you LOJ, right? The same year, check it out. Garvey starts the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company while in Ethiopia. What? While in Ethiopia? We got to look into that right there. Really? Garvey was in Ethiopia? All right. I don't know if it's a typo or whatever. Right? While in Ethiopia. Okay. That's what's going on there. So this sentence is to be read as the same year Garvey starts the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company. Right? And it's would be like a comma, right? Or like a semicolon. Like while in Ethiopia, Rastafari established a school. So Garvey was doing these things over here, right? And the movement. See, what Garvey was like a John the Baptist. He was just like John the Baptist, right? In the sense that there was already messianic movements that was going on. But he was that voice. Remember, like Garvey, he was that voice. Remember when they asked Garvey, are you the prophet? Right? He denied. They asked him, are you the Messiah? He denied, and he said, well, who are you? If you're not this and you're not that, then who are you? He said, I'm a voice crying in the wilderness. That's the prophecy right there, right? So Rastafari established a school for freed slaves, right? Because a lot of the slaves, it wasn't so much Ethiopia enslaving them, but it was the Mohammedan, the Muslims, and the Mohammedans, right, over there in the east. Issued another decree banning slavery in March 1931. Right? But you see what had to happen was that they had to build up the infrastructure to go after the slave traders, and a lot of them were the Edomite Arabs, right? Just to tell you the plain truth, right? And he set up bureaus to supervise the abolition of slavery in Ethiopia, because we have to kind of understand, both the Davidic Solomonic, order, right? And how other peoples, other tribes, Ethiopia has up to 80 or so different like tribes or ethnicities, more correctly ethnicities, right? But the majority all agreed right, to that Davidic Solomonic, that we can say that Judeo-Christian, that line of Judah, that Israelite, the Israelites of Ethiopia, right, to secure, right, their freedom. And this is why we have, like with Rastafari and the Judeo-Christian, and even later on the church and in the state, right? So Rastafari also established in Ethiopia schools, right, with foreign languages, and built hospitals with his private money. That need to be said. That's all when you understand, you'll see how ridiculous these lies, even against our Godfather and King of Kings, Haile Selassie, is, and even more so was, right? But remember the half of the story. He encouraged the United States to open an embassy in Ethiopia, right? Rastafari. Remember, this is all prior to and before coronation. So we say, well, no Africans really reach out to us, no black people, no Africans over there. That would be true with the exception of Ethiopia. Because remember what it says in Amos 9:7, are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me? So you see the Ethiopians over there. They, and the Rastafari, immediately recognize us over here, the Negro, Ethiopian Israelites over here in America, and you can see these bridges were being built. That's why Benito Mussolini and the fascists and the Romanists, the Vaticanians, right, Babylon, right? Because the Christians one time, used to see Rome as Babylon. You remember the whole white Anglo-Saxon Protestant story, right? But be that as it may, right, in summer of 1928, right, Garvey, right, traveled to Geneva to the League of Nations, right? So Garvey traveled, right, to renew his petition, right, filed on July 26, 1922. Then on October 7th, 1928, right, Rastafari was crowned Negus, or in the Hebrew Melech, right? Not king of the kings, but Melech, right? Or in the Amharic Negus, king of Ethiopia, in fulfillment of biblical prophecy and the prophecy of Reverend Webb, or Reverend James Morris Webb. And so Negus Tefari, or Negus Teferi, right, then sent 100 Ethiopian students abroad. And there's all historical pictures. So before many other, even Africans and other people could come to America, we see that there was already a bridge built, right, between the children of the Ethiopians, right, and the children of Israel, so-called Negroes here in the Americas and Caribbean. Check, right? So then we just a little bit more, but this is why this is so good. We intended this to be shorter, but got to give you the information, right? Ado Gavru Desta, then in the United States on a special mission to obtain economic and educational advisors, discussed repatriation directly with Rabbi Arnold Ford, right, whom the Abyssinian mission, that's what they called it, right? They try to rename us, from the Arabs and the Orientalists, right? Abyssinian mission in 1919 had made the first repatriation offer, right? The first repatriation. So look how even repatriation, Rastafari, look how it connects, right, with we the black Jews, right? Of the line of the tribe of Judah. I hear some people say, oh, Rastafari Jews, oh, you Jewish, are you ignorant? Right? Don't you know? Right? Ado Gabru then issued the fourth invitation to repatriate to Ethiopia in a message from Rastafari that stated this. You got to get this right here. This is good, right? Here's the message. We would welcome them back to Ethiopia, right? It says their fatherland. There is plenty of room, right, for them here. And we are certain that they would be of the greatest aid in restoring their ancient land to its pristine glory, end quote. Period, full stop, end quote, right? 3 months after this meeting, right? Notice this was proclaimed, right? Notice that. This was proclaimed, right? Right here. right? And 3 months after this meeting, Ford's congregation sent him to Ethiopia, Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford. Right, there's some slick talkers, ones putting out diverse information that's trying to skew things. So we have to get up on them. But this is an important half of the story, how deep the roots go. Now, think about this. We may talk about what we talk about today, but notice that miss bracha, that miss baraka, barakah, that miss blessing and opportunity, even then, right? But also notice that we can't say that no so-called Africans, right, reach out to us. We have to say which ones did, quote unquote. That was the Ethiopians and also the Negro connection that connected both us here, right, abroad, and those in Ethiopia, where that man was born there, and that man is the Rastafari known as Haile Selassie first. Yes. So his congregation, right, of Yehudi, right, black Jews, Israelites, sent him to Ethiopia accompanied by Miss Eudora Paris, a singer of note among Harlem nationalists. I like how they said that. I like how you said that, bro. Right? Harlem nationalists. Harlem nationalists. Now, it goes on, right? In 1930, Black Emperor reviews his soldiers. Right? You can check more about that. Rastafari conquering the rebel army, reviewed his loyal troops. Right? His loyal troops. Right? Because, you know, there's always a fight. You know, there's always a fight. There's much more in this beautiful article. This is a beautiful article here. Has a lot of vital information. And then we want to get to this. This is like the later part. This was, you know, go over some parts. The fuller article of Balanta Society. We gave you the information in the earlier part. This is the last part right here, because this is what kind of connect the dots. Because some say, you know, why have we been working this work? And there's been a lot of what they call it, enemies, right? Maybe they're just so ignorant and they're going off of these lies that they've been told. You know what I'm saying? To think like it was the other way around, right? Actually came from America, right, to Jamaica. You know, but once it reached Jamaica and Jamaica became a lighthouse, you know, ones and ones kind of disrespected the connection, and the real connection got lost, right? And many of those who knew better, right, didn't do better and didn't even like inform, like put this out. Ones like Balanta, right, Society, ones like I LOJ, Lion of Judah Society, and there's other names too that have been added, right, but a lot of that's been suppressed because, you know, as one Jamaican insider basically told me, man, if you were Jamaican, you know, they would accept it. It was so shocking, right? I mean, it has a tribalism, right? That's why when we say FBA, hashtag FBA Rastafari, it's with purpose, right? So on March 5th, 1936, not to alienate, but just to emphasize the half of the story that our ancestors did that has been alienated, right, from the so-called popular history, right? Right, we could get into that whole history, right? On March 5th, but like Balanta said, it ain't no mystery that the origin of Rastafari here in the West was in the United States of America, Chicago particularly, among black Americans before the first Rasta, right, Leonard Percival Howell in Jamaica. And he basically states so, and the evidence is there, right, empirically speaking, right? On March 5th, 1936, Dr. Bayan lectured to the Chicago Society for the Aid of Ethiopia and stated that, quote, the fighting in Ethiopia goes on, end quote, and that the Italians will soon be defeated, quote, when their funds run low, end quote. He also said, quote, no truthful dispatches have been received here since American correspondents were forced to leave Ethiopia. Mussolini and the Vaticanians and the Babylonian Vatican, you know, Roman Catholic, because remember, they bless bombs now. They bless bombs, right? And they claim to be so-called Christian. What kind of Christian does that to other Christian? Antichrist? Right? So now when the man is anointed, right? Technically, that's the messiahship right there upon that throne of David among the Israelites of Ethiopia. Then they go attack. That reminds me of Psalm 2. Why do the why do the heathen rage and the peoples imagine vain thing, right? So just to see the connecting the dots, right? Now I'm thinking about Chicago, man, Chirac, right? And all that we have witnessed, that destruction of generations out there, you know, in places like Chirac, right? People thinking, oh, it's about the streets, it's about money. Those are factors, but this is what it's really, really about. And even a lot of the youths out there, they be maybe wearing some dreadlocks or whatnot like that, you know, bunning on some law, you know what I mean, so to speak. But they don't know the half of the story that hasn't been told. They don't know this truth. You see what I'm saying? And it says, my people are what? Destroyed, right? For lack of knowledge, right? So think about what we're saying here with Chicago, right? Chicago, you know what I mean? Shy, the shy, right? But here, right? So they were forced, the American correspondents were forced to leave Ethiopia, right? Because otherwise, then you'll see what those evil, right, white men, right, were all about, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, you know, are we saying all are evil? I'm not God, I can't judge that, you know, right, you know, fully. But what we know is that, you know, evil be what evil does, right? And they did evil, right? But the fighting still goes on, right? And so by August 25th, Dr. Bayan merged all pro-Ethiopian organizations into a new Ethiopian World Federation Incorporated. And speaking about Ethiopian World Federation Incorporated, since this is part of our history, we too have been about restructuring over the last decade. Yes, there's a lot of different various ones out there, but I would say, you know, get with First Unit, get with this. You know what I'm saying? Come on now, it's past time for this foolishness. You know, there's some ones that started federations, and then they put the Marcus Garvey, red, black, and green, and they bring some Pan-Africanisms into it before they even get a square foundation on Ethiopianism. Come on, don't bring no replacement stuff. Yes, that's a part of it right there, but let's talk about what this really is, right? With local number one, right? The real local number one is the First Unit, right? International headquarters in New York, right? The EWF, right, adopts former UNIA musical director Rabbi Ford. They adopt his Ethiopian Awaken, right, as its anthem, right, presenting its charter, right, on September 3rd, right, right, through the law firm of Delaney, Lewis, and Williams. You know, another thing that you hear a lot of ones running around, oh yeah, you see the Constitution of the Federation, Haile Selassie gave this to us like he gave the one to Ethiopia. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. And you're covering up. Again, you're covering up the law firm of Delaney, Lewis, and Williams that was located at 36 West 135th Street, right? Evanston, Illinois, right? Evanston, Illinois, right, received its EWF charter on March 26, 1938. Chicago, right, received its EWF charter on August 25th, 1938. And a year later, EWF Local Number 17 received its charter in Jamaica. Jamaica. Look at the date. You know, we got to give it to our brothers. You know, there's enough good, right? But the lies is taken away, you know, from the credibility of the good. They received their charter, Local 17, in Jamaica on July 23rd, 1939, with L.E.C. Mantle as president and Paul Earlington as vice president. Joseph Nathaniel Hibbert, right? Check this out. Check out what we're saying. Joseph Nathaniel Hibbert. Because a lot of people say, oh, you know, Hibbert, he was a part of... Right? Yeah, but what about this? Half of the story. Archibald Dunkley, right? Archibald Dunkley and other early Rastafarites, right, are foundational members, right? And they're foundational members because of the foundational Rastafarites in Chicago, Illinois, amongst the Black American Rastafarites. Yes, that's right. That's right. So here. Of course, there's more on this once again. right? I mean, there's a lot of good information here, right? Like to, we have to do a whole series, but definitely reaching out, to Belanta, and the brethren, behind this and everything, to do something, for hashtag FBA Rastafari. Like one time looking at the whole FBA thing, we see the good and the beneficial. There's some things that we need to address, but with addressing this half of the story, right, is the way to put things contextually back in our true story and our true history, where it says, ye shall know the truth, right, and the truth shall set you free, right? Ones gave their lives. They were realtors. They actually built things. They did things. Riot Sweep Chicago. Think about how important, right, the Rastafari revelation, right, truly is when it's in its proper context, when it's in the way, the truth, and life, right, of the King of Kings Christ. So right here, this is another book right here, right? Let's go right here. Yeah, so the first Rasta, here's why we say that the first Rasta, right, the first Rasta came from Chicago, right, to Jamaica, right, the first Rasta, if you please, but the true origin, right, of the Rastafarites, right, in America, foundational, Black Americans, right there. And then there's more articles here, right? That's the part that we showed you before. Zooming in, this is Leonard Percival Howell, who clearly admitted, one of the most successful communities. It's something about the man of them generation, because they understood being on code. They understood truth, right? Keeping to the truth of things, because the truth, when you deal with the truth, you get trust, right? And see, trust is probably the real currency, right, of life and true life. And right here, Ethiopian World Federation, him a member of the Ethiopian World Federation. Oh, that's what that's what I was thinking about. I'm gonna drop the link, right? I'm gonna drop the link, for the official website, right, in the description of this video, as well as for membership application, right? Those who are interested, those who are interested as well. We're taking everything. We have to be discerning, and moving forward. You know what I'm saying? Because we see how when we don't have, in a sense, gatekeepers, so to speak. I mean, real gatekeeper. I know that's used in a bad, negative sense right there, but it's almost like if you don't have a lock on your door, you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? If it's your own thing, then you have the key. You know what I'm saying? But the news of the Ethiopian World Federation here, you see where he's in this article right here, right? This article right here, right? So we can see how when we put it, pick it up, put it back, we put it on the right track, right? You see, by trying to marginalize so-called Black American, right, has also marginalized the Rastafari movement, and also has swerved, right, the progress, right? I don't want to go into what it would be like, right? But now we can do something about it, right? See this right here? These were things that were circulating, you know what I mean? Circulating at that time, right? And we already know that inspiration came from ones who already were. Notice that the ones in Chicago didn't call themselves Rastas. They call themselves the Rastafarites, right? This is like one of the pictures from back in them days. This is Archibald Dunkley right here, you know what I mean? Some of the unsung, right? The unsung, yeah, some of the version of that right there. Let's go over here, the coronation. This is what I wanted to kind of share with you right here, because Ethiopia, right, was considered, right, properly Negro. That Negro link, and therefore that Israelite link, therefore Amos 9 and 7 are united as the children of Ethiopia, O children of Israel. This is from Haile Selassie I, right, 1935, June 15th, right, Chicago Defender. Notice the newspaper that publishes it is called Chicago Defender. Defender, right? We have to defend the truth, right? Here it says right here, I am not only emperor, or let's say King of Kings, right? I'm not only emperor or King of Kings of Africa, right? According to this quote from the article, I am king of all Negroes. Tell that to the Israelites. right? Some of the Hebrew, the other Israelites, the ain't right Israelites, the Hebrew Israelites that be saying all that yikiash, mishmash, right? I am king of all Negroes everywhere, including those in the United States, right? But not including, but of course, especially, right? But of course, right? So we can see more on this, but not to get into all of that right there. And we have a little bit here, and we'll start out where where we basically began right here, right? Speaking of Leonard Percival Howell, so in his own testimony, he was very truthful, very accurate, right? But it seems for some reason, that information got lost, right? Over how many years? From don't tell me, 85 years, right? Leonard Percival Howell, right here, Leonard, biographer Helene Lee Howell was born into an Anglican family. He was one of the first preachers of the Rastafari movement. This is true and is known by many as the First Rasta, right? Well, he's known as the First Rasta in Jamaica, but not the First Rastafari, right? He could never be the First Rastafari, right? Because Haile Selassie is the First Rastafari. Don't you know, right? All right, so here's some of the books, right? The Promised Key, as we mentioned, the Promised Key, and they did a whole movie about the First Rasta. I got to check those things out now because I want to find out like whether any mention of Chicago, right? You know what I mean? Any mention of Chicago, right? Or is this another kind of hip hop? Is this another hip hop that somebody else, brought hip hop to us as Black Americans? The insult, the injury, right? And not just the injury to us, right? But the injury to the whole movement, to all, right? To all of I and I, right? So is Leonard Percival Howell the man who started the Rastafari movement? No, the movement must have been started by the man, the Rastafari, right? So there. This is once again a good book to get. I highly recommend it. As we mentioned before, right? This is who started. Right? It says peace is a day-to-day problem, the product of a multitude of events and judgments. Peace is not an is, it is a becoming. So what it be like, right? Yeah, right there. So the Rastafari, right, movement, right, begins with Rastafari. And that link with we, the only significant link that we have over 400 years, right, with, we could say, our Black brothers and sisters on the continent is through Ethiopia, right? And it's with this man, the Rastafari. And that was not lost on the FBA, right? Foundational Black Americans. Notice in Brother Balanta's article, he says foundational members. They were Rastafarites, right? Because we need to start to use, right? That's right, Rastafarites. Anyway, brothers and sisters and brothers, right? Be it as it is, be it as it may, we say, Shalom Rastafari. Yeshua Shalom. Yes, I is I.
Lion of Judah Society.